Good afternoon and welcome to Pittsburgh City Council post agenda for today, Tuesday, July 27th. Today's post agenda is for the Pittsburgh City Council's legislation calling for an educational emergency in this city of Pittsburgh. And from the very beginning, I want to welcome my friend and partner, Councilman Daniel Lavelle. Also joining with us is Councilwoman Deborah Gross, and we thank you for her leadership and her participation. Let me give you a little context. Before COVID, there was an existing racial achievement gap in Pittsburgh, and we introduced a legislation because of that opportunity or achievement gap probably getting worse in the COVID. And that's why we called for it. There is a significant achievement gap in Black students versus white students in our school system. And we believe that our children are not learning at the level they need to be. And COVID has made that only worse. COVID has exacerbated the existing problems, and remote learning has been especially hard on Black students. Disproportionately, Black students have essential worker parents who may be unable to provide educational support at home. Black people have been disproportionately affected by the pandemic health-wise. Black students have had a particularly difficult time adjusting to online learning. There's a great number of students who simply did not log in. And so we believe that probably, and this is not hyperbole, I believe this may be since the 40s, the worst condition in terms of educational levels of African-American students. And so we are having a series of conversations to figure out, is the problem really that bad? But more importantly, what do we need to do and what kind of partnerships must be done to be able to support and encourage Black children in the future? And today we're going to turn our attention to charter schools. And we have a number of distinguished guests, many who are my friends. We're glad to have you with it. And I'm going to introduce you in order, and then I'll ask you to talk in that same order and give your overview in terms of what your schools are doing or what you think we need to be doing moving forward. They are Lenny McAllister, who is the from PA Coalition of Public Charter Schools, Dennis Henderson, Manchester Youth Development Center, Dara Allen Ware, a City High Charter School, Dr. Tina Chekin, Propel Schools, Sonia Meadows from Propel Schools, James Doyle from the Environmental Charter Schools, and Kay Chase Patterson of the Urban Academy Charter School. Welcome, welcome, welcome to this post agenda, starting with Mr. McAllister. You can give your opening kind of remarks and thoughts.
Reverend, thank you very much. And I want to thank all of the city council folks that invited us to this meeting today. And it's interesting that you said that you wanted to reach out and find key partnerships, because I feel as though public charter schools here in Pennsylvania and here in the Pittsburgh region are key partners in the pursuit of the goals that we need to have here in the city of Pittsburgh and for the Pittsburgh metropolitan area. And I'd like to remind us, and I don't want to take too long in my opening remarks, because it's really about the schools. But if you look at what charter schools, generally speaking, are doing, they've been in the business of what we're trying to address right now in 2021 for roughly 25 years. If we go back to the late 1990s, all of us from Pittsburgh remember the gang wars with the Bloods, the Crips, law, the mass incarceration, the school to prison pipeline, and how many African-American communities were being decimated. We were losing generations. And out of that angst came the charter school law out of Harrisburg in 1997 that provided public schools, thus called public charter schools, an opportunity to use innovation and other means to tackle the things that we saw in these communities so that we can get generations of students back into the fold, allow them to be successful scholars, and subsequently be successful contributors to the Pittsburgh region and throughout the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And if you look at what they had to take on over the course of the past 2+ decades, it's very much what we have to do right now. You have schools that have to take kids regardless of where they are, many times through a blind lottery, in fact, all times in a public charter school, through a blind lottery, and be able to look at a kid once they're enrolled in that school assess their needs, and move forward with them to get them to a point of time where they're proficient in academic skills and they have the life skills to be healthy and successful throughout life. And there's a reason why charter school enrollment has gone up 80% in just the past decade alone throughout the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, because these charter schools have found a way to be able to take these kids in, and each year they don't know who they're getting in. All the new students, they're not handpicking. They have to take who they're given through the blind lottery, assess, and create a learning environment that will fit the academic and developmental needs of those children. And more often than not, Councilman, they're doing so with less money than the average district schools. In fact, across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, it's 25% less coming from the state that's going to a charter school versus going to a public school. In fact, in the city of Pittsburgh, generally speaking, we're talking over 30%. So these charter schools have to do more with less through innovation and the type of drive necessary to close the gaps we're trying to address here in 2021, going into the first post-pandemic school year after the last 15 months of interruption. Now, there are some key things that I know these schools will talk about, and I want to make sure that folks understand that they're doing now. So if we're looking for solutions, we got some innovators that are already doing this. For example, on average, there are more teachers of color that are in charter schools than they are in district schools. In fact, across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, we have school districts that haven't had teachers of color in over a decade. We well know that when we have kids seeing people that look like them and can empathize with them, they're more inclined to open up, to be vulnerable, and thus learn in a very rudimentary fashion. That's something that charter schools do very well and can continue to do to help the city of Pittsburgh moving forward. As well, and I'd like to commend all the schools on this call for doing, I know that Chase and I have talked about this several times. They integrate a curriculum that brings about cultural esteem, the very things that many African-American kids, particularly African-American boys, suffer through when they're going through many of the traditional schools and have for decades. You know, Black learning is not Black History Month. It's every day, all the time, and it's a foundation for life. And so I commend the schools that do that, and that's something we can learn from. Because if kids have esteem in first, second, third grade, they're going to be scholars throughout education, and they're going to be leaders throughout life. And just the same, all of these schools, council folks, they also have elevated a new standard of learning and being in their environments. Everything from parental involvement to the uniforms they wear every day, to the type of structure that they have in their schools and the expectations for themselves and for the learning environment. These are things that charter schools have been providing, doing more with less over the past quarter of a century here in Pennsylvania. And considering that they're trying to catch up on district schools that have been around for well over 100 years, we have some innovators and some dedicated educators that can help close the gap that we've been seeing in Pittsburgh between Black folks and white folks for decades. And if we're going to be the most livable city for all, it's time for us to be one of the most educated cities for all moving forward as well.
Thank you very much. Mr. Henderson.
Thank you, Reverend Burgess, and I want to thank City Council for inviting us here. And hopefully after today, we're all still friends. I am here as an educator, a practitioner that's been in the field for 20 years plus, within the charter field for 20 years. Presently, as of June, I became the executive director of Manchester Youth Development Center. And I just want to put this into context because Manchester Youth Development Center was established under the martial law after the death of Dr. Martin Luther King. It was started by the community. Jimmy Joe Robinson, Reverend Jimmy Joe Robinson, and the colleagues from Manchester was looking to establish a safe place for youth. About 10 years into existence, his wife, who's one of the few African-American principals in the city of Pittsburgh, found it disturbing the reading levels and math levels of the kids that was attending the after school and summer programs here. So she left her full-time job as an administrator in Pittsburgh public school system and started a small private school. About 10 years after that, the charter laws came around and Manchester Academic Charter School, in which I was the deputy CEO prior to this position, was established. Me and Chase go back and forth on who was the first charter school in the state of Pennsylvania. However, I'm going to stick to my guns and say we were. He'll argue otherwise, but we're going to just ignore him moving forward. However, we were established based on the need of the emergencies from our very beginning. Graham, who we call Dr. Betty Robinson, Graham looked at us in a state of emergency when she left her job. Graham looked at us as a state of emergency when she started a school. And when, as Lenny had alluded to, as we applied for our charter, it was because we felt we were in a crisis within our communities. Today, as the ED of Manchester Youth Development Center, I'm excited to have the opportunity to continue to work with Manchester Academic Charter School and other schools to continue to innovate in education. You know, one thing that I find is some things that exasperate this crisis that we're in. A lot of times we look for solutions, and the solutions we seek are the exact same things that have us in this crisis to begin with. When we're looking at the standardized assessments, when we're looking at the curriculums that's being used, even when we infuse the cultural esteem and the cultural relevance, the measures that our kids are held up against are not aligned to who we are. You know, I was in a meeting the other day, and someone had asked about the literacy and the language of our students, and if we were behind other students. And I advised the person, I said, if you come to our school, our students and our parents will talk circles around you, and you wouldn't understand the thing that they say, because we have our own way that we communicate, and there's nothing wrong with the way we communicate. It's just not aligned to how you operate. But it is important that we do have opportunity to introduce our students to authentic experiences that introduce them to the opportunities that exist within this region and allow them to showcase the talents they have. And this is where that collaboration is extremely important, and something that we've always pushed at Manchester Academic Charter School, and as an educator, something I've always driven is those partnerships with businesses, technology, leaders throughout the region to create and design lessons that are real and applicable, in which students can develop portfolios. Parents are introduced to new career opportunities. So can it happen? Does Pittsburgh have the means and the resources? By all means, it does. The biggest determinant into whether we can navigate out of this is, do we have the capacity to listen to one another? Do we have the capacity to work together, drop some of our personal interests and our personal pride, and do what's best for the kids? And again, that's the work that I've been in for the last 20 plus years. And it is, you know, boots on ground. It's not philosophical. It's not in a university. It's about the work that's put in right here on the front lines. So again, I appreciate you inviting me, and I look forward to today's discussion.
Thank you very much. That brings us to Dr. Dara Allen Ware from the City High Charter School. Dara? She may be frozen on me. There you go. Need you to unmute yourself and hopefully talk. There you go.
Am I freezing?
Yes, we hear you now.
Of all days. So please stop me if that happens while I'm talking. So I'll try to make a brief introduction. Just thank you so much, Councilman Burgess, and Councilman Lavelle for the opportunity to join my colleagues here as a part of a discussion on helping, you know, our students advance with, you know, what is definitely a social justice issue of a public education that really does serve all of our students to be able to reach their full potential. And so I am privileged to be here and looking forward to learning from the group. I have experience, you know, as an administrator within Pittsburgh Public Schools, and the honor to also lead City Charter High School, a school I've long admired from the outside, and then working here and having the chance to continue learning as an educator has been so rewarding, and seeing our progress as well as areas that we're still learning and growing. And boy, did COVID show us all that. And so I hope too that, you know, through this, you know, as Dennis said, you know, the capacity to listen and learn, you know, I think we all students to do well. We have, you know, students throughout, you know, the city, throughout the region, Black and brown children that we all need to do well. in our schools and also in Pittsburgh Public Schools. And so we really need to make sure that we do listen and look for opportunities where we can learn from one another. Definitely what was made evident to us is that the design or core foundation of our school, which is relationships that are formed through various structures, looping, our advisory program, carried us through in terms of being able to connect and touch students, to know where they were, and for them to engage and work for us, because of those relationships definitely made a difference. The opportunity for teachers to be able to team, to feel the interdependence and the ability to serve students holistically as a team, and then as individuals have, various relationships with and learning and continuing to learn our students as learners, through those relationships. And boy, that we learn new things about our students in COVID as learners. And so it really did push us to grow professionally and personally. This focus, that we have been developing and looking to continue growing related to the focus on Black learners and their growth and their learning, and trying to shift it, from the reference of the gap, but really about, accelerating their growth and their learning, and what are measures, to be able to see that. And so I look forward to hearing from the rest of the group. Again, I thank you, and I'm glad to participate.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tina Check-in of Propel Schools.
All right, thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today and just to have this conversation along with my colleagues here. Propel similarly has been around for quite some time. We started in 2003. Today we're serving 4,000 students in the Pittsburgh region with 13 schools. And I think the reason Propel exists is because families desire school choice. And that was evident many years ago when we started, and it's more evident today. As Lenny mentioned, there are a growing number of families who are opting for charter schools, and school choice is a very important part of this conversation. I agree with all that my colleagues have been sharing here, but just to highlight a couple of additional things regarding Propel. We know that there aren't enough Black educators in the region here. It is a significant issue at the state level, as well as in all of our schools. One of the things that we started 7 years ago is a teacher residency program, and we're hoping to build a stronger pipeline of Black educators, not only here at Propel, but in the region. I think we have to look at what's happening. There aren't enough African-American educators going into the field, and we have to change that. We know that the achievement gap and the opportunity gap both exist. One of the things to highlight that we're doing, we have a strong focus on K-2 literacy right now. From my perspective, there should be universal pre-K in every school, because it really starts at that early age, and we have to build a strong foundation for students. If they're not reading proficiently by 3rd grade, they're 4 times more likely to drop out of high school, and we have to change those statistics. So we want to, put an emphasis on how important it is when we think about the achievement gap to focus on early literacy. In terms of trauma, in terms of COVID and everything that's been happening, we are focused on community health and wellness. A few years ago, we opened a community wellness center at our Northside School, and today we have over 35 partnerships, and that has been a tremendous asset and has made such a difference within our school community. Those partnerships are critical to closing the achievement gap for our students. Families are participating, community partners are bringing new ideas to the table. And it's important for us to work together collaboratively to make a difference within our schools. We've really focused in on mental health and wellness for the last 3 or 4 years. We're partnering with Monarch for our students. So as we think about what's needed as our students return holistically from COVID 5 days a week, we really do need to increase those opportunities for mental health and wellness. We know with our students, if we can help support and meet those basic needs, then the academic component, they'll be able to successfully move forward there. And then, one final thing, and then I'll move on to someone else, is the after school program. I think having after school is critical. Our kids spend 8 hours a day with us. We have about 1,000 kids that participate in our after school program. We have a supper program, but it's important for kids to be able to engage after school, have a place to go, get academic support as well as enrichment. But those are a few things I'll highlight from Propel. So thank you.
Thank you very much. That takes us to the same school, different person, and that would be Sonia Meadows.
Well, thank you, Reverend Burgess and Councilman Lavelle, for this wonderful opportunity. I'm excited about the chance to talk to City Council members, Deborah Gross, Teresa Smith, Bobby Wilson, about something that is at the core of everything that we do, even as elected officials, as residents of Pittsburgh, and that's to build a better future. Dr. Checkin has laid the groundwork for what Propel is doing. I'm really part of her support team, but I appreciate this opportunity because when we talk about education, often charter schools are left out of that discussion. So thank you for giving us this opportunity to not only highlight what we're doing, but to move forward and talk about solutions.
Thank you very much. That takes us to Mr. James Doyle from the Environmental Charter School.
Thanks so much, Reverend Burgess, and thank you so much for having us, to all of City Council, for welcoming us and having this really, really important conversation. So I'm James Doyle. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Environmental Charter School, and actually came to ECS 2 years ago. And prior to being at ECS, I spent about 7 years working at Pittsburgh Public Schools in a variety of roles. So I was in human resources, I was in student services, got to work under the wonderful and amazing Dr. Dara Ware Allen. And then after I left Pittsburgh Public Schools, I went to run a small nonprofit organization before coming here. And to put in context what we do here at ECS and how we frame the importance of this issue, I'd also like to kind of tie back to something that Dr. Checkin and Mr. McAllister talked about, and that's this idea and this concept of choice. So I grew up here in Pittsburgh, and I went to Pittsburgh Public Schools. So I grew up in Lincoln, Leamington, went to Pittsburgh Public Schools. And as a Black student in Pittsburgh Public Schools, I didn't actually have too terribly of a wonderful experience. And a lot of it related to being a Black student in Pittsburgh Public Schools and often at times feeling left out of opportunity. So it's frustrating that, I won't say exactly how much, but 20-ish years later, like, we're still talking about these same issues. And I think that what's really, really important is this idea and this concept of choice. So charter schools like ECS and like all of our charter school friends on this call today, we all have the opportunity to be able to provide that choice for when that public school option just might not be for a student. And I think that that's a critical lever that we all can pull, and we need to pull harder, particularly for our Black and Brown students, because oftentimes, or a lot of times, that option, that kind of solid track option within the public school may not be the choice that's best for them in terms of their overall development. So at ECS, one thing that the way that we look at this really, really important concept, and just for context for the scope of ECS. So we were chartered in 2008, and then we started as a K-5 school system, and then currently today we're a K 10 growing to K-12 system, and right now we have a little over 1,000 students across kindergarten through 10th grade. In 4 locations in Pittsburgh. And as we think about this idea and this concept of being able to provide that choice for students, one of the things that's really critical for our mission is that we provide this idea of engaged citizenry and out the door education. So obviously out the door education, as part of our name and our mission, does relate to a love of, protection of, and preservation of the environment, but it also relates to how can I as a person, how can we as a society all work together and engage effectively so that we're all moving forward to ideally a better world. So one thing that is critical for ECS, and it relates to how we engage particularly and how we support our Black and Brown students, is that within every classroom and every teacher really has this concept of baking in social justice education as part of the curricula that happens at ECS. And that's a critical piece and component to how we think about equity and diversity and how we think about how we as a collective can improve the experience for our Black and Brown students. The second thing I'll mention too is that at ECS, we, and I feel very, very strongly here, but we openly, clearly, and full-throatedly will call out and name and really, really talk about with all of our staff how we all own this concept of supporting our Black and Brown students, because for decades, for centuries, there are systems and structures that have disenfranchised our Black and Brown students, and we need to actively break that down. So that's something that I talk about daily at ECS, and I talk about that in front of everyone and anyone that I can. But I also recognize that it's easy for me as an African-American male to say that and feel that, because I've experienced this my all 35 years of my life. I've experienced that, right? But it might be harder for some of our my average teacher that's a white female. It might be difficult, but we don't shy away from those difficult conversations. So we are critically looking at every aspect of what we're doing so that we are putting support systems and structures in place that we're able to improve, enhance, and accelerate the experience of our Black and Brown students. So the second and last piece that I'll mention too is that coupled under that is it really allows us to not only look critically at what we're doing, but we look critically at how we start and where we're going, right? So I mentioned how ECS as a school system is growing to high school. We were able to update our charter to add an additional middle school and a high school in 2016. And as part of that, we really thought critically around where are we placing our schools so that we're honoring and allowing choice for the students who need us most, and how are we structuring those schools so that the experience for our Black and Brown students that are coming to us is the best that it can be. So that's another piece. Both organizationally, we think about what happens in the classroom, but we also think about what happens at a much higher level within the organization so that we're working on improving those conditions. So I'll stop there, but I appreciate you all, and wonderful to see your lovely faces, and looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you very much. That brings us to Kay Chase Patterson of the Urban Academy.
Thank you, Councilman Burgess and members of council. It's an honor to be here with you this afternoon and to testify on behalf of the Urban Academy and to join some of my distinguished colleagues. I must, for the record, acknowledge that Mr. Henderson is wrong. The Urban Academy was established first, founded first, and we are looking forward to starting our 24th school year here in Larmer in Pittsburgh's East End. So thank you, Mr. Henderson, for trying. Once again, you have failed. If you want to learn about the Urban Academy, you can visit www.urbanacademypgh.org, or you can stop over and visit us in Larmer at 437 Turret Street. I want to take the time I have, if you'll allow me, to really talk about the elephant in the room, and that's systemic racism. The failures of the public education system have been brought upon by, frankly, systemic racism, underfunding, special interests, politics, and poor legislative policy, this body included. Many charter school opponents have intentionally ignored historical facts that the Commonwealth's public education system has been in a state of failure for Black folks since it was created. Black and poor children, those with the most need, have been marginalized in the Commonwealth's public education system for more than 150 years. The General Assembly has a constitutional obligation to provide an education that gives all students the necessary resources to meet academic standards. Now, in Pittsburgh, the practice of separate and unequal in the Pittsburgh public schools began in 1835. In 1838, there were 12 public schools that made up the Pittsburgh public school system. 5 of them were for white males, 5 of them were for white females, 1 was for infants, and the other was for Black boys and girls. It wasn't until 1937, nearly 100 years after its founding, that the district hired its first Black teacher. And in 1965, in its annual report, ironically titled "The Quest for Racial Equality," the school district said then that it was ultimately all about resources that should be provided to poor Black students. And so here we are, however many years later, having the same conversation with a different audience about the same problem. And so the question I have here is, who's going to put the money where their mouth is? Who's going to put the bucks where it matters the most? In the pockets of those who need it the most. The data is there. The evidence is there. It's easy to Google. It's simple to have these conversations over and over again. The reality is, it will always come down to resources. It will always come down to what our Black students, what our poor students, what our families in need have and don't have, and who they're competing against, and how our systems continue to allow those who are in the least advantaged position to remain there because they're never given an equal opportunity for a hand up, not a handout, a hand up. And so my hope is that we will have an honest and candid conversation today, holding one another accountable for the role that we play in continuing to perpetuate a system that has allowed poor Black children to stay behind since it was founded in 1835. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for those opening concerns. Now we're going to have a dialogue. I want to open it up to members of council to be with us in this conversation. I want to tell you who's on. R. Daniel Lavelle, who's the co-sponsor of this legislation, Teresa Kell Smith, who's president of council, Councilman Bobby Wilson, Councilman Deborah Gross, and Councilwoman Erica Strasburger. I think that's all that I see. So I'm going to start off asking my co-sponsor, Mr. Lavelle, if he would start off this conversation, and after him, I will call on other members of council to participate.
So thank you, Reverend Burgess, and thank you all for being here with us. I had one question in mind, but then Chase began speaking and my question differs now. So Mr. Patterson, and anyone can feel free to chime in. I guess my question is, when you speak about sort of marshaling resources, obviously we think about funding, dollars and cents. What I will hear and what I expect to hear tomorrow, just so everyone is realizing, we will have the superintendent and members of PPS board with us tomorrow, having the similar conversation. What I expect to hear from them is one of the challenges that PPS has is the increase in allotment that goes to the charter schools, making it thus harder for them to service the kids within PPS because so many, an increasing amount of resources are actually going to the charter schools. Do you think that's a fair or unjust statement? And how do you respond to that? So I want to start there.
Yes, it's absolutely, it's an unjust and unjust statement. It's inaccurate because the bottom line is the state funding is supposed to go to the student, not to the school system. And Councilman, that's and I apologize for cutting you off, Chase, but If you only knew how many times running around this state, I hear that question. You know, the truth of the matter is each dollar is supposed to go to every single student. And too often than not, education throughout the country, let alone Pennsylvania, is more about an industry for well-paying jobs with those that have master's degrees and doctorates than it is for those that need education the most. Again, for example, I told you 25% of every dollar on average across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania that is allotted for public education from the state doesn't even get to a public charter school. And let's understand, number one, every single charter school in Pennsylvania is a nonprofit public school. Number two, the only guaranteed option for school choice for poor people in America are charter schools. You do not have a guarantee to a scholarship. You do not have a guarantee to get into Central Catholic High School or anything else. The only guarantee you have is a public charter school to find the best academic and developmental fit for your child. And even with that in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, you basically are playing the equivalent of the Pennsylvania lottery, you and Punxsutawney Phil. So, and if you think about how much of a tragedy that is to tell a poor Black kid whose parents have been failed by certain schools in this region for 3 to 4 generations that let's flip a coin and hopefully you can get into a better school is egregious. Now, let's also take in consideration the fact that, as Chase so eloquently brought up, these schools, and particularly PPS, has had a 150-year head start on charter schools. And because of the choice now being available for the last quarter of a century, 80% increase in enrollment over the past decade alone. And that's with an anti-charter governor being in office since 2015. We have still seen those increases, and the increases were 65% before the pandemic even is factored into consideration. The money is supposed to follow the child, and every single time poor Black kids get caught up and rich folks and middle-class people fighting over who's going to get more pension dollars, who's going to get a 5% raise, and who's going to be able to have more vacation times. Our kids suffer, and we lose another generation of Black talent in Pittsburgh, and it's unsufferable and it's unconscionable for us to continue that same rhetoric.
Thank you, Lenny. You said exactly what I was going to say. And let me just summarize his point with an easy math problem. If the state of Pennsylvania sends for Chase Patterson to go to the Urban Academy, it's a public school, $1 to the Pittsburgh Public Schools, they only send the Urban Academy 75 cents.
Or in Pittsburgh, it's actually closer to 70 cents, Chase. It's even higher of a percentage.
Well, thank you. So I mean, you know, I know that I'm supposed to be respectable today, but come on. I mean, that's really doesn't make any sense. We're educating the same kid. Now, you know, what are they responsible for? Transportation as a school district? It's just preposterous. And if that's the idea, if that's the argument from the school district tomorrow, they got to step their game up. And to have had a 150-year head start, and in most cases not be performing better than many of the charters on this call, they got a real problem, and it's not keeping our 25 cents to the dollar.
So, okay. So along those lines, when you speak about resources, who gets what, when, where, and why, what are the additional resources that you believe our children need in order to close the gap that we see that currently exists within our kids at PPS?
You know, when and I believe Dr. Allen had alluded to this, you know, we keep talking about this gap, about closing this gap. We're missing the opportunities for growth. We're missing to have that discussion about the growth of our students. We're missing the opportunity to access. You know, a lot of times we talk about how to close this gap, and everybody's trying to dump more time on academics or more of the same old thing. What's needed, honestly, is a true partnership, not the same old traditional schooling. We need to provide our students and our young people opportunities and access to really get entwined with the economy of this region. Pittsburgh has a thriving economy if you are not Black. Pittsburgh is one of the most livable cities in the world if you are not Black. But yet, our families the families I serve do not have access to what's going on here. And we're talking generational. When people look and talk about the achievement gap. It's not an achievement gap in regards to what our kids can do. It's an accessibility gap to the opportunities that exist. So if we really want to work on closing this quote unquote gap, it's about bridging the access to opportunities and truly provide our students and our young people and our parents an authentic look at how Pittsburgh truly operates. Again, we try to silo the education of our students into the schools. As long as we keep siloing education, that's not just in Pittsburgh, that's across the country. We're seeing this wedge. And speaking of wedge, Chase hit on this again. Our whole system was built around a wedge. And all that's been happening over the years is this push and pull back and forth that just makes this wedge, this gap wider, but it's not an achievement gap. It's just a lack of access to the opportunities this region has. It will not be found in a textbook. And until our businesses come together, our city council, our educators, our boards of education come together and truly look at how can we provide authentic access to our young people and their families to what's going on in this region, it will not close. And that's the truth of the matter, because again, textbooks are outdated. Even if it is a brand new textbook, by the time tomorrow comes, what they learned does not apply to what's going on in this ever-changing economy that we have in this region.
And council members, if I may very briefly as well, you're going to see a contrast in styles. The charter schools on this call, they're all innovative. They look at what they do from a curriculum, from how their daily schedule set apart, everything on an ongoing basis so that they can be innovative and very responsive to the needs of the kids, particularly those that are struggling. PPS and other school districts are basically saying, we think we have the formula, we just need more resources. When the data shows, and Chase brought this up, you can Google the data. We know that this hasn't worked for the kids that the charter community has been serving for 25 years. Their methodology hasn't worked for 50 to 75 years, if not a lot longer. So just dumping money into a system that's not going to work is like putting gas into a car with no engine.
So Dennis, you mentioned that education should not be siloed to the schools. And I think one of the reasons why Reverend Burgess and I issued the declaration is because we also fundamentally believe that, right? You have the school, you have the children for X amount of hours. We as a city, as government, have a responsibility for those children before they get to your school, after they get to your school, in the evenings, on the weekends. How do you view, what can we as a city be doing to better partner with schools to really make education a 24-hour, weekly, yearly thing that we're all participating in? Because the reality is, and the numbers bear this out, we as a city will only be as strong as our schools are. So we're dependent on our public schools, we're dependent on our charter schools to be as strong as possible, so that we do not continue to lose residents, which for the record, we have every year for at least the last 30 years. And we see the numbers are actually going up every year with children leaving PPS and going into our charter schools. So with that in mind, you mentioned it not being siloed to the schools. How can we partner with you to better educate our children or support the education that's happening within those schools?
Well, it's sad, but it's just a sad truth. Our schools are inundated with politics, and the politics are placed before our children. So I commend you and Reverend Burgess and the City Council for extending to work across the table. And what I hope to see is that the other areas, school district or PPS in particular, accept the support of, again, whether it's the city of Pittsburgh, the businesses of Pittsburgh, because for us to truly holistically educate our children, it will take us kind of dropping our own personal interest. Personally, I have been called upon by a few people from Pittsburgh Public, and I am a firm believer in public education. Public education comes in many formats. What turned me away from joining Pittsburgh Public, and this was just my personal call, it was the bureaucracy. I love the fact that I'm in a small school, that I can be innovative, and if I want to work with Daniel Lavelle, I can make a phone call and say, City Councilman Lavelle, can you come by and work with our students? And I don't have to go through a bunch of red tape. And for us to really truly educate our kids, it does take everybody kind of brushing aside the interest, the political interest. Common sense says that every one of our students graduate as citizens and we need them as productive members of our community. But until we get past the political, and I said this opening, we have the capacity to do, we have the resources. Pittsburgh has a tremendous amount of resources, but it's about the people. If they can set aside their own personal interest, we can easily get this done.
If I may add just to what Dennis is saying as well, I think it's important to understand the way that the current funding structure is working is that the money is flowing through the school district to the charter school. And oftentimes that causes issues between the traditional public school and the charter school. We're all in this for the same reason, and it's because we want students to be successful. It is our job to do the best that we can to educate our children. And until we begin to talk to each other, then those problems are going to continue to exist. One of the reasons that charter schools exist initially was because we're supposed to be innovation labs and we're supposed to be doing innovative things, traditional publics learning from us and us learning from traditional districts. We have to break down some of the barriers in order to get past this and work collaboratively, because there are so many wonderful things that are going on, that is going on throughout all of our communities, and we have to work collaboratively to share those ideas and opportunities.
And can I add to, I agree completely, and just from like and I'll speak for ECS, but I think I also most likely am speaking for all of my colleagues and friends on the call here too. Like from the perspective of what we're able to do as charter school leaders. So what we're able to do as it relates to some of the innovations that you might not see in this space. Like our collective arms are wide open to having conversations, having discussions about how some of these things can be implemented within Pittsburgh Public Schools. And on the same end, when they're knocking it out of the park in certain areas, like my arms are open. Like I'd love to hear that. I'd love to learn that. Like I feel are a group of learners and a group of individuals that are really, really willing to be able to take on the opportunities to be able to learn and develop. So I think that of any recommendation that I could say for our Pittsburgh Public Schools friends is that, you know, our phones are open. Like, give us a call. Mr. Lavelle, I also want to follow up on something that you mentioned too, just in terms of, and Mr. Henderson as well, in terms of just that experience, that educational experience for the kid and how we break down those silos, not just within the school setting, but within all of the other places and spaces, and how city council potentially can be supportive of that. So Mr. Henderson would know this, but I spend a lot of time on the after school side. And there are some really, really good things that have happened in the coordination of after school and summer programming across Pittsburgh. So one example that's a wonderful opportunity is the Bridge to Summer initiative that started as Summer 16. So the goal there was really thinking about how do we wrap around summer, because from a parent perspective, it is really hard to be able to find a summer opportunity, and it's really hard to be able to find it, apply for it, know that it exists, and then to be able to kind of navigate through all of the sometimes challenges in terms of getting your kid actually in that. I think that provides a great kind of example of just education in general. Oftentimes, because there's so many things that happen, and we've talked a lot about choice, but there's a lot of things that exist and happen out there. And more often than not, we see those with resources, those that have the time and the energy and the expertise to be able to navigate those difficult systems. Those are the ones that actually take advantage of those opportunities. So one recommendation as we think about just school, after school, and other things is looking at Bridge to Summer, but then also thinking about things that exist, like my good friend at A+ Schools, James Fogarty, in terms of even applying and exercising your choice for schools. I would love to be able to have a conversation around Pittsburgh Public Schools, like I do with some of my charter friends here. Like I sent families to Chase. I'll send families to other schools if it doesn't work for us, because if we're all doing well, then everybody does well, right? Rising tide raises all ships. So I think that that's another really really critical piece that the city of Pittsburgh potentially could play, is who can kind of coordinate on behalf of everyone, just to make it a lot easier for our families to be able to have that access. Thank you.
If I may, I'm sorry, Dr. Allen.
Thank you, Chase. I'll make a very quick point on the coordinating comment that James mentioned. Is the convening power of city council means something. And, having us here, PPS tomorrow, is often we are working in direct opposition together against each other. And I think of like your colleagues that are also in the area from the state legislature, who are in that position in terms of like the ability to approach this issue, with open minds, as opposed to it becomes partisan. Before, public education, has been, a bipartisan issue, of wanting the best options for families to be able to use. And options for families are family focused, student focused. Particularly for Black and Brown children. So when we try to talk about they don't deserve these options, I know what's better than you. Like, I think it's worth, and it compels us to have more time together, to where city council can, I think, play a convening role of at least even getting people to the table, as opposed to like, hey, I don't want to be seen on the side of talking to charter schools, when there's so much that can be gained, from hearing from both sides, and really seeing how it does by hearing our stories, hearing the stories of our families, that it affects individual families, and then more collectively, they got to be able to hear it first. And I know we have individual relationships, but when folks get into a group or a room, and then no one is willing to vote or stand up, for what is public choice for our Black and Brown families. Not saying, oh, you have to be pro-charter, but don't I deserve that for my family to choose what is the best choice for them, and as opposed to completely eliminating it off the table. And I feel like we have to have more opportunities for us to even be able to hear, and it's okay to have this be a bipartisan issue again. It shouldn't be Democrats are against public choice, and only Republicans are for, charters. And there are other things, that cross both ways. We just have to get to a better place. And I feel like city council's convening power and leadership role could play a role there.
Thank you. I believe that's what we're attempting to do with these series of conversations that we've been hosting. And just for the record, I am both a supporter of public schools and charter schools, because for the record, I am a parent of 2 children within PPS. But before being comfortable with sending them to the school I ultimately chose, I did apply to charter schools because I was not comfortable sending them to their neighborhood school. So I understand the need for choice. I do have one question. Is there any table whereby the charter schools sit with PPS to talk about what is working within your schools, best practices that you're finding works, innovative things that you're doing that PPS could potentially implement to support their children? Like, as an example, because I'm looking at Dr. Allen, I know you used to anyway, have all your students do internships, because I've had a number of city high charter schools who were interested in politics intern in my office, and they discovered that's not what they like. But that would, and so I firmly believe that's something PPS should be requiring for their students as well. But is there a table where you all are able to have conversations with PPS about best practices to move our children forward?
I've seen Chase disappear, and I really want Chase to hit on this. Chase, come bring your face back here. I'll say about a few years back, maybe about 4 or 5 years ago, Chase and I and another colleague sat down, and we had a discussion about exactly that. And hence we began what we call the State of Black Learning. And we've been hosting conferences and workshops and keeping the door open to invite out of school space, public school space, universities, and you know, it's been very well attended. We do desire to see more Pittsburgh Public and the door is open. We do get a number of teachers, and Chase could give you a little bit more specifics as far as the numbers of where we are. But yes, that we established the State of Black Learning Conference specifically for that reason to bring together all the stakeholders and those invested in our youth, our Black youth.
When does that conference take place?
Correct me if I'm wrong. I want to say August 12th and 13th this year. It'll be going on. Chase, stop sitting quiet. He's the promoter more than I, but I'm just a workhorse. But 12th and 13th.
If you would be willing to send council information, those of us that are able to participate may be willing to, because again, we do want to figure out how we can support education within our city. But go ahead, Mr. Patterson.
There's no record to reflect that the Pittsburgh Public School District has done anything to organize the support of their district around the State of Black Learning.
And Councilman, what you got to understand, and this is something that's going to be for all of your colleagues on City Council to really address, is you have what permeates throughout the city of Pittsburgh, which is both we want to be a world-class city, but we want to be the Pittsburgh we always remembered, without remembering that the Pittsburgh you always remembered always shut out Black people, always drove out Black talent. I mean, growing up in my generation, you know, what do you call a Black Pittsburgher when they become an adult? Somebody that lives in Atlanta, because they never stayed in Pittsburgh, you know? So what you're finding is this pushback between, well, why do we want to change? I like the city the way it is, but there's certain things that have to change in the city, and that includes in education. One of the beautiful things about the State of Black Learning is they bring in national African-American leaders to talk about the state of Black learning. But the flip side is when you start talking about some of the people that have the reins of power in their hand in Pittsburgh, many of which are in PPS, they're absent. And part of that reason why is because people are used to whether it's protecting the mascot, whether it's protecting the jobs, or whether it's protecting, let's dare say it, the redlining that drew the school districts and all the boundaries in this region for quite some time. There are people that don't want this to change. And if City Council is going to drag Pittsburgh through the 21st century and make it what it should be for everybody, you're going to have to break some eggs to make another omelet, because there are people that simply are not trying to change the system and make it look a little different than what they're always used to in the city. And to me, the State of Black Learning is one of those things where once you go into the conference, it's almost as if you leave the city of Pittsburgh in some regards for about 4 to 5 hours. And then when you exit a building, whether it's, you know, down at CCAC in Homewood, where it was a couple of years ago, or where it's going to be this year, you go right back into dealing with the realities that people are used to in this region.
And for the record, you can find more information on that at stateofblacklearning.com.
Always the workhorse, aren't you, Dennis?
Thank you. I'll digress for the moment and let my other colleagues chime in. You're on mute.
People are chiming in, Councilman Lavelle. I did want to come back to the point about internships, and I think that also connects with what Dennis was saying around this community-wide approach. Businesses play a huge role in the education our students receive. The internships that they get, I mean, that is a graduation requirement. So we are depending on those businesses and organizations to provide exposure, nurturing experiences where students are having learning outside of a traditional academic environment that is going to shape their future in terms of their immediate next step plans, and then also the connections that they get through a mentor that they wouldn't typically have access to, getting back also to that accessibility conversation. And there are lots of organizations and businesses that I know want to work with schools. And a number that want to work with Pittsburgh Public Schools. It's challenging to get connected. And so the ability that to like rethink how we work with folks, you know, beyond the bureaucracy. And now speaking to PPS, like they have to figure that out, just as all of us have to figure that out to really cultivate what the broader contributions of the community can be. And, you know, I'm speaking of business, you know, and professional organizations. James was also speaking about, you know, our out of school time, you know, partners. There's so much that can be captured and leveraged to provide a more holistic approach for our students, and all of our students, you know, deserve that.
Council, if you can, one of the takeaways you can do for us is, as you're trying to figure out how to fix public education in the city of Pittsburgh, you got to make sure that you understand and you project the message that charter schools are public schools too. So if you're trying to fix public education in the city of Pittsburgh, you are automatically including Propel. You're automatically including Urban Academy. You're automatically including environmental. You're automatically including Max. If you don't do that, you're going to have this division that's not going to serve public education well. I know charters are a little different, but they are public schools held accountable the same way PPS should be. And we have to look at it as a totality of public education, because there within is where the vast majority of Black students go to school. If we're trying to fix this emergency, we have to make sure that our messaging and our approach is encompassing in that way.
So I really appreciate that. I do have a follow-up question though. So part of what drew our state of emergency was the fact that we had actually read the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission's report on PPS, and it's abysmal, right? So 38%, I believe, of Black children are reading at proficient level in 3rd grade. Only 31% are proficient in math, right? And so, and this has been the same way for the last 2 decades. So we said, we've got to figure out how to fully wrap our hands around it. But the data for the charter schools isn't necessarily in there. And where does one go to learn the data within our charter schools? And I'm partially asking this as someone who's also beginning to think about where I'm gonna send my children for middle school. And so again, beginning to consider charter schools. So where does a parent go to get information and the data on what's happening within our charter schools?
I do know that the Department of Education at the state, each charter school has to do its annual amount of audits, not just financial audits, but also the academic performance criteria has to be there as well. So whether it's at the school district level or more likely at the state level, that information is available. Again, the same standard that you would find, Councilman, for Westinghouse High School, you got to find for City High Charter School as well.
And A+ schools, thanks Lenny, has really been intentional about taking a comprehensive approach of trying to you know, glean a lot of that information that sometimes it's hard for, you know, your the regular parent, you know, trying to just make a good decision, you know, for their family and their individual children, so that you can see, you know, how all of the schools line up on common metrics, while also allowing them to share some areas that are unique to them. So again, not the, you know, be all end all, but it is a good start of having a more inclusive, you know, document that looks at that information side by side.
And all of the information is on the Future Ready portal as well. So you can look at the Future Ready Index. You can look at 3rd grade students in one school versus another school. So that's important for families and community members to have access to that.
You know, and Mr. Lavelle, Councilman Lavelle, when I look at these numbers as a parent and as an educator, you know, same thing. I'm always navigating the waters. So what I'm gonna do with my children. And I spread the whole table. I've done charter, I've done private, I have one in public, you know, so it's whatever's best for my individual child. But when I look at these scores and you see the disparities as far as the numbers of students being proficient and things of that nature, I look at that more so as, and pretty much every educator in here could attest to this, this is more a condition of the social economics. You'll find a great correlation in where the parents are socially in their own education as far as how their students do. It's more so of a reflection of households than the schools initially to start. The schools does play a role in helping to bring those up, but we're looking at, we're not comparing apples and apples. You're comparing students. We have about 30% of our students live in poverty here. So when you start looking at the number of poverty, you look at the careers that even those that's not in poverty but truly are not middle class, their parents are working class parents that really don't have access to the day-to-day vocabulary and linguistics that our scores are set by. So again, I've always been a champion of, not to say I don't look at the scores, but even as we speak today, I never considered myself the most articulate speaker. And Reverend Burgess, we was talking about this beforehand. My family's from Mississippi. My grandfather went to second grade. Great mentor, one of the most intelligent men I ever met in my life. If you was asked him, go give a speech, everybody look around and say, what did that brother just say? But trust me, you sit down and ask him to figure out something, he will work circles around anybody around you. So again, what are we giving our students access to? Are we giving them the tools to truly demonstrate their knowledge, or are we just assessing how fluent they read the King's English if that's not what's spoken in their house? So I don't want to say ignore the gaps, but those gaps are not true. And they're not, even if we strive to achieve and meet those gaps, which has been going on the last 30 years, ever since No Child Been Left Behind legislation, we've been reaching to close these gaps and missing to give students skills. And that's the critical part that we need to be focused on. How do we give our students access to the skills to be able to transition and make a livelihood for themselves? The rest of the communication will come along the way while they're working towards something that's authentic and they can see benefits them and their families in the future, and not a grade.
I will say too, parent satisfaction isn't published, and talking with parents to see how satisfied they are in their charter school or their traditional public school is a great indicator. It's important what parents feel and experience within their schools.
Thank you very much. That takes us to Councilwoman, Mr. Lavelle, I'm assuming you're finished?
Come back, go.
Huh? You're done? Okay. That takes us to Councilwoman Deborah Gross.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for being here. I have to admit, I was just flipping up all the reports that you were just mentioning and scrolling through them while listening as well. So I have up on my screen that State Commission on Human Relations report, the A+ schools report, and I think one other. And one of the things I couldn't catch for myself that I think is important for just the public to hear and for us to kind of be able to place and frame all of your expert testimony here is how many of our Black students are attending PPS versus charter schools. Well, I've heard a lot of comments about school choice, about giving our Black students the time and attention that they deserve, and that happens in our charter schools. And also, full disclosure, my two children, elementary school child and a rising high schooler, attend one of these charter schools that we're sitting at this table. But it just, I think, helps us to frame kind of where we are today, so like how many students are in the Pittsburgh system or in the city, kind of school age kids do we have? I think the last time I checked, our updated census estimates were at 20-some% Black in the city. Is that still true, right? I think we're at 20%. We might have fallen from 23 to 20, if I'm not mistaken. And then, we hear testimony that our Black students are overrepresented in Pittsburgh public. So are they also overrepresented in charters?
Councilwoman, thank you for having us. Generally speaking, and I'll speak more from a state perspective and let it distill down to each individual school because they know the numbers for their own individual campuses. But generally speaking, in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, roughly 2/3 to 70% of all charter school students, regardless of whether they're enrolled in a cyber charter school or a brick and mortar charter school, they're either Black or brown. They're either African American or Latino. And generally speaking, roughly 65% of all charter school students, regardless of where they're enrolled across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, are eligible for the federal free and reduced lunch program. Now, when you start taking it to the urban centers, Pittsburgh, Erie, Harrisburg, the Lehigh Valley, and Philadelphia, those percentages significantly increase, where you do have that over-representation in charter schools. But if you look at why that's the case, they're also the very families that have been failed due to the redlining that,
I think we've covered that. I'm sorry to cut you
Yeah,
off, but we
no, that's
are running
fine.
long on time, and I'm really interested in the demographics of the city.
That's fine, no problem. Thank you.
Do we have, anybody have the numbers on the city of Pittsburgh kind of charter enrollment by race?
Couldn't give you the specific numbers, but I can say very generally, and I'm pretty sure when you get the specific numbers, you'll see them right in the ballpark. Pittsburgh is approximately 80% white, and Pittsburgh Public Schools is about 60%, maybe 55% white. You see a huge white flight of Pittsburgh Public Schools into the private, or who knows where they go. I never hear that question as far as why is Pittsburgh, 80% white, but make up, almost only half of Pittsburgh Public Schools.
I know in my district, but traditionally there's been some 50% enrollment at least in diocesan and private schools.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And again, so,
yeah.
And I heard a couple of people allude to this, whereas, it's always this thing that as the Black children need to attend public schools, charter schools should not exist because they need to attend public schools, but yet no one questions, why is it okay for whites to send their kids to private schools? Again, I'm fortunate now, if I want that option, I can send my child to a private school. But my first child, the school district that I was living in, there was no way in the world I wanted my child there. And the charter school option was a savior for me and my wife at that time. And I'm gonna say more so a savior for our child, because who knows how she would have turned out at that school. Not knocking the school, it just was not for my child.
Just funny, I think it's important for us to emphasize, because it may be confusing to a listener. Like, so if we know that our Black population is overrepresented in Pittsburgh public schools, so how is it also overrepresented in charter schools, right? But that's because we also have a significant enrollment in the city of Pittsburgh kids in private schools and in Catholic schools.
And it comes down to economics. I mean, again, you're talking about a city where there's a $20,000 gap between Blacks and whites. Blacks can't afford to go to private school, so the charter school is there for that option. Families that have the means choose to go to private schools. And again, no one really questions why they, or even questions the fact that those numbers are so out of alignment when you look at our population of the city of Pittsburgh and the school district of Pittsburgh.
So I think that's interesting. Can we also say, does anyone know offhand what is just numbers of total enrollment of all races in charter schools in the city? I don't know that. I think our public school enrollment is only about half of all school age children. But as a breakout of charter schools, does anyone know that?
Councilman Gross? I don't know that, but I did look up the numbers you were asking for PPS. 53% of PPS students are African American, 33% are white, 14% are other.
Yes, we know the Black population is overrepresented there, but I think what we're hearing.
Can you clarify what overrepresented means?
Sure.
What do you mean?
Yeah. So if you've got the total population of the city of Pittsburgh kids, school age kids, being 20% Black, we think, right? We'll get better numbers when this new census comes out. But then you look at Pittsburgh public school enrollment, and 53% are Black kids. Then there's a higher representation of Black kids in the public school population than there is in the population at large. So as a fraction, right? 1/5 in the city population, but 1/2 in the public school population. Okay, so it's a bigger percentage. We call that overrepresented, a bigger representation. So, but I think what, and I'm also just curious to know if there's, I see in these reports like some 22,000 school-age kids are enrolled in Pittsburgh public schools, but I don't see jumping out at me kind of like what are the numbers of city kids enrolled in charter schools? So if we know it's not super important, but I am curious, and I'm sure the public is curious too.
Councilwoman, I'm trying to grab those numbers for you now. Give me a moment. If you don't get them on this call, I promise you I'll send you an email.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. And one of the goals of these conversations, and again, you all are the experts here, but we are also kind of using this as a way to exchange ideas and goodwill for how we all can play the roles that we have the responsibility to play to support all of our kids and their success. And so some of the things we've talked about in other sessions are, as city government, what can we do more of and what can we do better of, right? And so I've brought up things like housing instability, we know hurts our kids' success, right? And so we know, for example, in the current moment we're at right now, post-COVID, or not post-COVID, but still in COVID, but with having 18 months of COVID behind us, that we have a growing eviction crisis looming. And we need to all do better at that. And we need to make sure that our kids are not put out on the street. I know from the eviction advocates, the people on the front lines trying to keep people in their homes, that the vast majority of our pending eviction cases, and they are looking at the court dockets and trying to find the households that are facing eviction, are largely female-headed households with children in the household in the city of Pittsburgh. Those are your students, right? We need to make sure that they are housed and that they aren't forced out of the city entirely, for sure, that they're not forced out onto the street, but they are secure in their housing. And I think we all need to see what we can do about that. We know that of the people below the poverty line in the city of Pittsburgh, the 60 to 70% of those households are also female-headed households with children in the home, from Michelle Jackson and the Femisphere report. And we know that they are also food insecure households. We can all do better, and thank you for your work and distributing foods. I think many of the schools here did a really excellent job pivoting to distribute take-home meals. And I hope that that's something that continues, right? To be in the kind of before times kids weren't being sent home with food. And households, their entire families weren't being provided with food. I think that is one of the things that we've learned really, really helps people, that we should all continue to do. And our Parks and Rec department did an excellent job. I always like to give them acknowledgement as well.
Councilwoman,
yeah,
it looks as though it's roughly 10,000 in Allegheny County. Now, the tricky thing is, because certain charter schools pull from the city and from neighboring towns, that number could be fuzzy, but we're looking at roughly 10,000, probably somewhere around 9,700 to slightly over 10,000 from the numbers that came from PDE.
Interesting. Thank you. Thank you. We'll
Councilwoman Gross, I
that.
text my school board member. They said about 5,000 children are not in PPS. They're in charter schools.
Thank you. Thank you. And they would know that because it's their student dollars that are being, sent to charter school, I assume, right? It's not some other Allegheny County student. I guess that funding follows them too, if it's coming from an Allegheny County municipality or school district. Okay, so we followed that by the school funding, the funding per child, as you mentioned, in their home district. We've talked before about how we have lagged decades behind in doing lead paint inspections. We know that we're only just beginning to get a really good grip on lead poisoning of our kids from the work at Create Lab at CMU mapping this. And I should mention also that they're mapping eviction crisis and housing insecurity as well. So it's really helpful to see where we need to invest our resources, time, energy, and again, our jurisdictional powers, right? We have been pushing, several of us on council, for us to do lead paint inspections as a city because we have not been doing them, right? And so we know that half of our city population are renters. And we know that some of that population of renters are in, we call it out of code compliant housing, right? Substandard housing that is suffering from the effects of lead paint. We also know that we have a childcare problem in the city and that many of our households are stretched thin, especially those female-headed households with children. There may be kids that are too young for your schools or the PPS schools that also need care during the day. So housing insecurity, food insecurity, lead paint is a problem, lead poisoning, childcare, and that kind of aftercare thing that I think some of you were mentioning earlier. These are, and Councilman Bell also said, these are the kinds of things that we can work together to find and support and correct. You may know of households facing eviction that we don't know about, right? Because we don't have jurisdiction over the courts. I tried to pass an eviction moratorium and it hasn't been implemented the way it has been in Harrisburg and in Philadelphia and other cities. You may know of families that are struggling with childcare that we don't know about. We're trying to do our part in how we do economic and community development to financially invest in childcare facilities and support and grow that kind of small business network in the city, especially the neighborhood providers, because it makes it so much easier for households. Those are the kinds of cost burdens, utility burdens, transportation burdens. We know these are cost burdens that make it difficult for kids to succeed when our households are struggling with these challenges, right? So I feel like together we can figure out where you have resources, where you have information, and how we create that supportive network around and lifting up all of our vulnerable households and our kids. So, you know, I think all of us are eager to continue that conversation. I'll stop talking at you and let you have a chance to respond. Anyone who's got some thoughts, thank you.
Well, first of all, thank you. I invite the council and housing advocates to our Propel Northside Wellness Center. We've been meeting with a lot of families. Some families have received eviction notices, so we're working collectively with them. We partner with UPMC and their health plan. We're trying to provide additional support for our families wherever needed, but it's a good starting point because we have a lot of community partners as a part of the Wellness Center and coming together collaboratively to support our families and community members is a place that we all can come together.
Thank you. So again, I just kind of invite us to continue this conversation. I think as you mentioned, our goals are to just be sure that our kids are getting the academic resources that they need, but also all of the other things that just, help make it more difficult for them to achieve academically. If we can help them with those things as well. I'm certainly not an education expert, but in our role and our resources and our jurisdiction as City Council, we want to do our part that helps you do your jobs. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councilman Bobby Wilson.
All right, thanks. And thanks, Councilman Burgess and also Councilman Lavelle for, continuing this conversation of education. I just wanted to, just ask, and I'm asking this question because I see a lot of like us versus them, basically the charter schools versus public school conversation happening. And I was wondering from, your perspective, from the charter school perspective, what you see the public school system, Pittsburgh public school system, and how they're handling education, and I just want to know, like, what are the positives that you see that they're really doing, so that we can, kind of more and more work together on, what is working with education.
Like I said early on, I have a daughter that attends PPS for high school. One of Pittsburgh Science and Technology Academy is a phenomenal school. Kappa is a phenomenal school. When you look at these schools that's doing amazing jobs, best way to define it, they operate like charters. They have a lot of autonomy. They can do what they need to do. And again, Pittsburgh allowed all their schools to pretty much operate like a charter and give them a little bit more autonomy so the people that work there can actually do what's best for the constituents that they serve. I think we see a lot more going on, and then provide the resources as needed to those schools. So that's the first thing. But Pittsburgh Public do have some great things that happen. They really do. I mean, I wouldn't send my daughter there if I did not believe in the system. And that particular school system that operates within SciTech Academy. As I was just listening to Councilwoman Gross, one thing that we should all keep in mind is, and Chase has talked about this right off top, is these systems that make this environment that we are in, that our students are in, this crisis that our students are in, it is very systemic. And it's not a us versus them, as you're saying, Councilman Wilson. Again, I am a public school advocate. I'm a product of public schools. However, as Mr. Doyle stated, I have been victimized by public school education system as well. So that's a big part of where my passion comes from, to not create or not let what happened to me happen to any students. But when we look at the systemic things, as city council and the businesses and everything else, let me know if I'm wrong, because I have now transitioned out of the charter, but as I was leaving out, I had got wind that our middle school students need to catch the Pittsburgh the PAC bus to school. To put kids in charter schools from all over the city and tell them to catch 2 or 3 buses to get to their school, you're taking a big chance of losing kids on their way to school. That's part of the systemic problems, again, that maybe the city and our business can look into to help resolve that. I mean, it's about us all working together. And when we have these areas, and I'm not blaming Pittsburgh Public School for the scenario we're in, we're all coming out of a pandemic. There's a lot of resources stretched. Charter schools is not the reason resources are stretched. If anything, I say charter schools demonstrate models of how to maximize the resources that you have. But again, if you take all of the trials that we're going through, both charter and PPS, and the city and the business can work together to help come with solutions. Transportation is a solution that we need to come up with, because that bothers me to know that there's a 10 or 11-year-old child that's supposed to catch a bus from Homewood to the north side by themselves. So again, those are the things that I'm looking at that we can work together. And I'm not going to knock PPS. I do understand when you're dealing with behemoth when it comes to operations. I do commend where PPS does it right, which is giving autonomy to schools such as Kappa, schools such as SciTech Academy, where they can do what they need to do within their own environment, what's best for their kids.
Hold, if I may, and this has been a love fest, but I'm going to be the bad guy. I apologize. Councilman Wilson, this is an us versus them. And much of this is set up in Harrisburg because of funding. I mean, Tina said it best. Dr. Chekin said it best. Listen, the bottom line is, as long as the state money comes through the school district before it gets to the charter school, the school district thinks that state money that belongs to the student and the family belongs to them. So if the student decides not to go to a PPS school and goes to a charter school, PPS then complains that they're losing their money because their student went to a charter school. And if you're framing the argument that way, as it's been framed for the last 15 years, you're never going to be able to get around that. Now, from a city council perspective, you have two fiduciary responsibilities that I can see. And I say that as a resident of Penn Hills. Number one is you're trying to optimize every single dollar that flows through the city of Pittsburgh, because you need to make sure that every education dollar that comes through the city gets a good student ready to be a good Pittsburgher or a good resident of the region. And number two, you need that student to be able to work in Western Pennsylvania and not leave Western Pennsylvania. The school district and even the charter schools, there's been so much fighting over the funding, the student gets left behind on that. If there's a role that you all can play, it's to kind of take both sides by the collars and say, I don't really care about the funding argument. We can figure that out with Harrisburg, but I need kids to get a good education so they can work here, so they can thrive here, so they can buy houses here, and that they can stay here. But as long as the funding situation is as it is, it's going to continue this political, I hate to say it, but this political fight over funding, because the money goes from the state through the school district and then to a charter, and it just provides a dynamic we've been fighting over for years now, and the kids get lost in the process. So we have to fix that. We can't say we have to just acknowledge it and really fix that once and for all. And we're working on that in Harrisburg, but anything that you all can do at the city council level can help us immensely.
Well, thank you. I want to ask a question about one of the broad criticisms of charter schools was that there's like a high turnover rate of teachers. And I just wanted to know how you all support teachers. I'm aware of some schools that have, the schools are supported by, teachers are supported by unions at some of the charter schools. And I just had a question about, how you all are supporting teachers, since that's one of the more of a national criticism of charter schools.
Councilman Wilson, if I could jump in. That hasn't been our experience, and I know you're asking it broadly, but definitely what has worked for us, where I started with is, in navigating the pandemic, our relationships have made such a huge difference, and that comes through looping. And so our students who begin with their teachers and their grade level principal in 9th grade, those teachers feel a personal and professional commitment to the students and their colleagues to get them all the way to senior year to walk across the stage. And it's something that we don't just wish for, we cultivate and we track. We have an independent evaluator who monitors, metrics that, we have deemed, important to our school through our middle states accreditation. And, we look at the good, bad, and ugly annually in terms of like where we measure up. In those areas. I will say there's not much ugly, but there's always constructive learning, that we take away every year. And it's a part of our hiring process. It's like, are you willing to make a commitment here? And it's hard, people are leaving the teaching profession. Particularly, it's been exacerbated in COVID. Pennsylvania ranks lowest as it relates to amongst the bottom, I think 5 as it relates to diversity among teachers, and being able to attract individuals, who can be a part of our community, and matching, the racial demographics of our students, that it should also be representative in our teaching, population. Chase, can give some great feedback on, some of the efforts that I know that he has done about being able to attract and keep, diverse teachers. But it is definitely something, that we work at, and we've been fortunate that has not been our experience.
Okay, I just want to allow you all the opportunity to respond to something that is typically said, about the charter school system, specifically in this context, because, this bill of what the councilmen have put forth here is, everyone's concerned about the education of Black children in Pittsburgh, and within that discussion, how much the teacher plays a part and how much they feel invested in that school. And you know, being from a family where, didn't have a union teacher, but father was in the union and always fought for, the rights of for himself and his other colleagues, but also just, in terms of in the school, system, just that the teacher feels that they're invested, and, in large part, the union plays a big part of that. And so I was just trying to work through some of that and allow you to respond.
Councilman, there's also other considerations. For example, a charter school, even when a charter is renewed, is only for 5 years. And generally speaking, again, unfortunately, that us versus them, you see authorizers of charter schools that will put a lot of charter schools through the loops when it comes to renewing their charter. That impacts everything from being able to get bonds to other types of stability that would make a teacher look and say, I really like this school, but if their charter is being renewed and it was supposed to be renewed in 2019, and here we sit in 2021, is this school going to be closed down? Am I going to have a job? Am I going to have to take a pay cut? It's a lot easier for them to slide over to Penn Hill School District, Woodland Hills School District, Pittsburgh Public Schools, and have at least work stability. One of the things we're trying to improve upon is all these charters here, when they go to renew, we're trying to make it a more efficient process so that charter length can be longer, so that when those CEOs go to their teaching workforces, they can go to them and say, we just renewed our charter, we're going to be around for another 8 years. Then those people can plan their careers. The way that the contentious nature of the back and forth between authorizers and these charters are right now, that's not a leeway that some of these CEOs have. And I see this across the state. It's really bad in Erie. It's really bad in Philadelphia. Not as bad in Pittsburgh, but I know there have been instances over the course of the last 20 years.
And if I can add, unions are not about the customer. They're about the members. And public education is supposed to be about the kids. And so oftentimes, Councilman Wilson, I believe that the adults, unfortunately, take priority over what's in the best interest of students. Now, let me say, what we've come to realize here at the Urban Academy is, frankly, we're a training ground for some of the Pittsburgh Public School District's best teachers. They come to us, they work for a couple of years, they get a quality experience in terms of urban education, and then they go and make a bunch more money with a bunch of great benefits at a school district. And so that, there is no real, frankly, competition outside of culture and climate. I read recently an article that said, if you're quitting teaching, it's not because you don't like teaching, it's because you don't like the school that you work at. And so what we've tried to do at the Urban Academy is create a culture and a climate where the people that work here want to be here, where the students are at the center of the work that we do, even if it is at the sacrifice of the adults in the building. We work long hours, we work over the summer, we work an extended school year, and that's because we know what the students that we serve need and deserve, and we give it to them as best we can with the resources that we have, which again is about 70 cents to the dollar that the school district has.
Councilman Wilson, Chase actually hit on another point as far as, I've been in charter education for 20 years. And coming up as a teacher, the one thing that I knew was that I am a charter teacher. There's a certain mindset that comes with being a charter teacher. I'm not looking for a union to protect me. I'm here for the kids. That's first and foremost. I've had educators that was here at Manchester Academic Charter School with me that wanted to start looking at forming a union, and I'm gonna be quite frank, they were pathetic teachers. They were looking for their own personal comfort. And I'm not saying this about all unions, but I know this group that came to me to set up a to set up a union, I did not want to work with them as colleagues because I knew their hearts was not with the kids. At Manchester Academic, I've been here for 20 years. We have about, it was funny, I was sitting there looking at an old yearbook of 25 staff. 20 years ago, we had 25 staff members. Of that 25, 15 of those individuals are still here. When I hear about this turnover rate, again, every charter is different, That is not the issue here at Manchester Academic Charter School. We have a number of educators that have been here. We have not only educators that's been here, we have 5 teachers right now that were former students. So when you talk about a community and a culture that's established, I welcome anyone to come in here. You can feel the community. So it's not about the politics or union, it's about the love, about education, and about creating a safe environment for our kids. That's the type of environment that we need in which our kids truly can thrive in. And again, keeping the politics out of it and the interest groups out of it is what has allowed us to create that environment.
Okay. Well, thanks for responding. I understand that there's different opinions about union representation, but one thing that they do provide is the probably the ability for time off for their own children and to explore what type of education they'd like to see for their child. So like most of the parents and in the city of Pittsburgh that we talk about resources, to have the time to explore what school their child may, what's best for their child. Some of the individuals or parents in the city of Pittsburgh are strapped with time and where to send their child and to look at the numbers and have that ability to do that. So the better the workers supported, especially for working parents, working families. I was just just bringing up the larger part of the conversation of really why some of the children go to your schools is because the parents have had those rights to that ability from their employer to take the appropriate time off to explore these options.
Our employees are afforded that ability again because we have to compete with Pittsburgh Public, which is extremely hard to compete with, and we value our educators. But since you brought that up, one thing again, I think City Council can really help with this. As I've transitioned over to Manchester Youth Development Center, I have a more keen eye on childcare, early childcare. That is where I see horrendous work conditions, not only for us, but throughout the city. If we really want to look at how to help level the playing field as our kids enter into schools, I'm looking at ours and I'm thinking, there's some horrendous situations for our staff, and those are some of the things I've immediately looked to address. But to find out the average income is $10 an hour for somebody that's working from 7 in the morning till 7 in the evening with our pre-K children, that's where we need to look at it again. It's not so much, it's not so much the charter versus public, and charters are going to compete. You have to compete with Pittsburgh Public to the best you can, or any public school, because there's options out there if you're an educator. For childcare workers, their options are limited, and I see that the inequities in which they are paid, the hours that they have to work, the hours they get breaks, that's where issues lie. And again, to provide a quality early childhood education is essential for our kids to get off on a level playing field. So that's where we, again, if we're going to talk about that as far as where we should be concerned about the workers, it's the workers of early childcare across this region that we should be looking at.
Okay. Well, thanks for all your comments. Unless someone else has something to say, I was going to.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that I understood your point, Councilman Wilson. It sounded to me as if you said that parents who chose charters had more time to investigate the schools that they were sending themselves to. Is that? Did I miss?
I think it's likely that is some of the cases. That parents have. That there are some parents that have the opportunity. I'm not saying for all. Just like there's the Magnet program for Pittsburgh Public. It is one. It is another step. It is another. Several other steps to. Explore education that way.
Mm-hmm. That's what I thought you said.
Yeah.
Well, let me say at the Urban Academy, our parents don't have much more time to do what any other parent at any other school is able to do.
Yeah, I'm not saying all. I mean, my point isn't that everyone is that boat, but there is similar to the, just like I said, the Magnet program. Some just families don't have the time and resources to explore other options.
if I could jump in just briefly about the Magna program, is I used to oversee the Magna program when I worked at Pittsburgh Public Schools, and I used to have heartbreaking conversations with families to where they were shopping around, doing the best, that they could. And there just aren't enough spaces for the number of families that want to attend the Magna programs that are out there. And conversations about really creating up pathways and options at every level, K-5, middle school and high school. So there's pathways into some of these high school programs. The district just needs to do that work. And it's politically fraught, but that does start to create, some other options for families that they really will have the ability to have more choice. And that's in addition to us. But conversations such as, I talked to a family and it still sticks with me, that she applied for one of our high schools. The criteria as you go from elementary to middle school to high school. Her child was in a school previously, and there was a high school level for that school. They received all A's, but they didn't qualify for another school because they scored below basic on the exam. And so whose fault is that if a student is in one of our schools, they're getting all A's and they can't meet the requirements to be able to gain admittance or to be eligible to apply for a Magna program? Like, and that family is like, okay, so you're telling me I have to stay at the school that my child is not even making below basic. And so I can cite many other stories that have been heartbreaking for families where it's like, oh, I guess I just have to go to my home school, even though I would like another option. And so families do a lot of work, and the accessibility to high quality public options are not as great as the number of people that are seeking them and deserve.
Councilman Wilson, I just do want to clarify the application process for Manchester Academic Charter School. You submit your name, your contact information, you are in the lottery, the end. To apply for Pittsburgh Sci-Tech, that was a vetting process. So whenever I hear that whole thing about, selection, I've went through that selection process for my daughter, and my heart hurts for my students that I know have the capabilities. However, they may not have that support at home to get into a magnet program. Again, for a charter, put a name in, you put a contact information, you are then in the lottery. So it doesn't take much research. It's just a matter of just seeing what your options is and having the, access to the internet or a piece of paper to submit a name and a number.
All right, thank you.
Thank you very much. On the line was Erica Strasburger and President Smith. They were on for a while. I do not see them currently. I'm going to not ask questions. I will say just one thing before I'll go to close. And I was going to ask each of you to answer the one question is, that is there an educational emergency in terms of Black students, in terms of students, period, but especially for Black students in the city, especially after COVID. But I think, having heard your conversations, I think all of you would agree that we are absolutely in a crisis situation when it comes to academic achievement of kids. And I think that's true. That has nothing to do with charter, public. That's just the nature of the educational level of our kids. Now, we can argue as to why that is, or how we solve it, or what we're doing to solve it. But I think the actual numbers, test numbers, having not even tested for the last 2 years, kind of speaks for itself. And I don't see any rampant opposition to that. The last thing, I guess, the other thing is, my interest is not blame. My interest is not, and I have, a love for all schools, all kids. My interest is not the blaming part, but what can we do to make it better? How can we wrap around after-school programming, summer programming, youth facilities, city facilities, resource, what can be done at what age, both the early childhood, as I heard some of you say, and then those kids who are not grade proficient, what are the resources we can give them to have greater academic achievement? That's really my interest. I am laser-like focused on only one issue, and my issue is greater academic achievement of kids. That's it. I have no other interest. And I've spent my life fighting for that in my secular profession, in terms as a teacher and as someone who's run a variety of after-school and supplemental education programs. And so that's my interest. So with that, I want to thank Lenny McAllister, PA Coalition of Public Charter Schools, Dennis Henderson, Manchester Youth Development Center, Dr. Dare Ware, City High Charter School, Dr. Tina Chekin, Propel Schools, Sonia Meadows, Propel Schools, James Doyle, Environmental Charter Schools, K. Chase Patterson, Urban Academy Charter School. I appreciate all of your participation. You've been very thoughtful and helpful in helping us broaden this conversation. Is there anything else from members of council? If not, thank you very much. And anything, Mr. Lavelle, before I close?
No, thank you all for participating. You all gave a number of examples of ways that we could be collaborating. And so I look forward to following up. I do want to try to create a table where both PPS, charter, and the city can be sitting around the table collectively figuring out how we can better the lives of our children. And so I look forward to following up with all of you. So thank you for your time.
If there is no other conversation, thank you very much. And we are adjourned.
Thank you all.